Hey guys, so I'm going to show you how we're going to work with absolute values when we're working with piecewise function problems. And so the first problem that I'm going to kind of work out with you guys is when we're just looking at the absolute value of x, if this is the function that we're given. So this one, I'm just going to kind of show you guys like what exactly you're looking at in terms of the piecewise function with the absolute value of x. I don't know if you guys are actually going to have any problems specifically like this. This is just kind of like an introduction into working with these absolute values piecewise function problems. And then in the next video, I'm going to go over a specific graph that I think was given in one of the classes as a problem to work out. So we know, and as you guys have seen before, the graph of the absolute value of x looks something like this. So this is the graph of the absolute value of x, right? So we already know this information, and with the way that this is given, one of the first steps I've told you guys is to make a number line when you're working with these piecewise function problems. And so since we're working with these piecewise function problems, the first thing that you're doing is you're making a number line, but this form right here, how this graph is written right here, this is not written as a piecewise function yet. This is still written in the original function of just knowing that f of x is equal to the absolute value of x. So before we can make a number line for our piecewise function, the first thing we want to do when it's in this form is the first step is going to be turning this into the piecewise function format. And so again, part of the reason that I like to give you guys these little steps and stuff is that, say you're working on an exam or a quiz or something, and you see a problem like this and you don't even know where to start, or you don't really know what to do. You just look at the problem and you're like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do here. Just having these little steps can really help break it down. So maybe you don't know how to necessarily solve the problem as a whole, but at least you can break down the steps and kind of work with it a little bit. And so again, like on exams and stuff, partial credit is better than no credit, and maybe if you start working it out just by doing little steps, you'll actually be able to solve the problem and get the answer right. And working through steps, and I'm going to try to give you guys as many steps as possible for problems, is going to also be helpful because it's just going to make it faster for you guys when you're solving these problems. It's going to also help you guys know what you're doing and get to the right answer in a more efficient way. So the first thing we want to do is turn this into the piecewise format. And so looking at this, we know that, well, first we want to do this little squiggly line thing. So we have the absolute value of x. So we're plugging in x values. We're not talking about our output yet, because we know that if we're plugging in, say, you take the absolute value of 5, this is equal to 5. If you take the absolute value of -5, this is equal to 5 as well, because you're just moving 5 units from 0, or 5 spaces from 0, whatever you want to call it. You are 5 spaces or 5 units away from 0. So that's what you're talking about when you're talking about absolute values, is if you have a negative inside your absolute value, it is just talking about what the absolute value of that number is. The negative doesn't matter there. The number itself is what is important there. So when we're looking at this, well, what's a positive number? A positive number is something that is greater than or equal to 0. So when x is greater than or equal to 0, meaning when x is positive, so whatever you plug in on your x-axis, when that's positive, your x is positive, right? Because if you're plugging in an x number and your x number is greater than 0, you have positive x. Your y value that you're going to get out of it is also going to be positive. And then when you're plugging in a negative number, you're plugging in something that is less than 0. So 0 is bigger than whatever that number is. So we're going to talk about numbers in the negative direction. So we're talking about when x is less than 0, because whatever x value you're plugging in here, sorry, I'm going to turn this on airplane. I keep forgetting to do that when I'm doing these. So when you're plugging in numbers that are less than 0, you're plugging in negative numbers. So if you're plugging in a negative x value, you're just going to have negative x. When you put this negative x inside of your absolute value, you end up with x as your answer. So if you're plugging in -7, you're plugging it in from this direction of the x-axis, you're plugging in -7, you end up with 7. So you're going to end up here on the y-axis. So that's why your y-axis remains above 0. So your range of this function is greater than or equal to 0. But the domain of this function is any x value, right? Because domain, we're talking about what you're plugging in. Range, you're talking about what you're getting out. So the domain of your absolute value function is going to be -infinity to infinity, because you can plug in anything going from all the way -infinity to all the way +infinity. But then the range, what we're getting out of this, is going to be a bracket. You're starting at 0, and then you're going anything that's greater than or equal to 0. So we're going to have 0, infinity, because you don't see any part of this graph dropping below the 0 in terms of the y-axis. So this is what we're looking at when we're looking at our functions in terms of absolute values, piecewise functions in terms of absolute values. When you have the absolute value of x, you have x if x is greater than or equal to 0, meaning that you're just plugging in a positive value for x. You have -x if x is less than 0, meaning you're plugging in a negative value from the x-axis.